I am Jen Kaifesh. So I'm the owner and founder of Great Expectations College Prep. And we have partnered with Pally now for over a decade and done a lot of events for them and kind of worked with, families from freshman year through senior year and supporting them. The wonderful and lovely Karen Ellis, who runs the College Center, could not be with us tonight, but she says hello. And she and other members of the College Center will be joining us for other webinars in the series. So you'll get to see their faces occasionally as well. Just a little background on me. So I went to Northwestern University, and while I was there, did some work with admissions and then stayed on. And then the university kept me on to work with undergrads applying to grad school. So I kind of, in a good way, got stuck at Northwestern and loved the experience and loved it, and have done it ever since. So I've been in the college admissions world for about 20 years at this point. Just terrifying and dates me. But anyways, without further ado, let's get started. So for those of you who are freshmen and sophomores, what we want to cover today, the main thing is kind of breaking down what colleges care about, and therefore what you should be doing over the next few years and what you should care about. These are obviously, we'll talk about the breakdown. Different schools have different things, and different types of schools care about different things. So we'll talk as much as we can, but recognize also, if somebody has a 4.6 GPA and is the valedictorian trying to apply to Stanford, Harvard, Yale, the things that we need to talk about today are very different than if somebody has a 2.0 and is trying to understand the process for, transferring from junior college to a four-year college, things like that. So I try to kind of break it down, but if anything, is unclear, we'll do Q&A at the end, and I'll answer as many questions as I can. But I'll try to make sure I'm giving you clarity when it's not relevant to anybody, except if you're applying to top 10, top 25 schools. So, okay, looking at a college application. So this is what colleges see. These are the elements that they look at. Again, standardized test scores is the big kind of variable here. As I'm sure many of you know, we're in a more test optional landscape. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But understanding that your test scores kind of, in your high school academics, your extracurriculars, they're evenly weighted depending on how amazing they are. So if you have some unbelievable extracurricular activity that maybe you've spent so much time doing, it explains why your grades are a little lower, or your grades are incredible, but your scores aren't as high. Clearly, these percentages and percentiles can kind of change, but this is a general for like a standard student at an average university, kind of what they're looking for. Now, essays, letters of rec, miscellaneous, we'll get to. There's a lot of factors that you kind of have control over, and other factors that, you have control over all of them, but things you can control now and things you can control later. So when we talk about high school academics, this is the way I always want to try to articulate when people talk about how do you know if your grades are good, how you compare. Colleges are using your transcript to compare you to your classmates, right? So that is your GPA and grades. Yes, how are you doing in the classes, but course rigor, right? So if you are taking honors or AP classes down the line, if you are taking more honors and AP classes than the majority of your students, fewer. Again, there are a million schools in the country that have no need for APs, right? Or even honors, and they're wonderful schools. Other colleges want to have a ton of honors and APs. So class rank, keep in mind, Pally does not formally rank in the way that you're not going to be told you're number 37, right? And most high schools don't. But what colleges generally do get is something, and I heard that Pally may not be sending that this coming year, but it's changed in the past, and they have this information from prior years, is a breakdown of GPAs. So in previous years, colleges would get something that would show what percentage of students have above a 4.2. How many are between a 4.0 and a 4.2? How many are 3.7 and 4.0? So even if you don't formally rank, they get an understanding of where that GPA stands compared to everyone else. So again, a lot of high schools don't care about this, right? What they do care about is how everyone else at your school is doing. So as an example, there is a West Side private school. I had a student who had a 3.68 GPA going into senior year. She was bottom 25th percentile in her class. The grade inflation was so high that everyone there had basically above a 4.0. Colleges know that. So just putting it into context, this is something that that's why they're looking at this, right? Your school could give out all A's, that changes things. Now, you have to balance course rigor and GPA. So one of the biggest mistakes we see is kids who are gung-ho going, they want the Stanford, Harvard, Yale, right? They want these top schools. So they're like, I'm going to take as many honors and APs as I'm allowed to take. You have to be careful, because if you do that over the next few years and your grades suffer, I always point out Stanford and Harvard and Yale, I'm just picking on those right now, but top schools, even top 25 schools, but definitely top 10 or 15, do not need kids who've not gotten straight A's, right? Unless there's, again, a specific reason or something that stands out. Most kids who are getting in there have straight A's with a ton of APs. So if taking, let's say you're looking ahead to junior year and you're thinking you want to take a certain number, you want to take 4. If 4 is going to be too much work for you to keep up your A's, and even A's and B's for other schools, take 3. If 3 is going to make that complicated, take 2. You need to find a balance between challenging yourself, but doing well, keeping your mental health in check, but also showing colleges you can handle the workload. So the moment your grades start to slip with a harder class, it's showing them that you could not handle the workload. So don't melt down or stress about it necessarily, but I do want you to think about this as just something to be keeping in mind, I guess, when you're signing up for classes for sophomore year, if you're a freshman now. If you're a sophomore applying or picking junior year classes, you have more APs to choose from. Choose wisely, right? And pick things that you're interested in, things that you're excited about. If you want to go into STEM, if you want to go into engineering, if there's AP math, AP science, you should be focusing there, right? If you think you want to if you tell colleges you want to study psychology and your school offers AP Psych, which I think at the moment it doesn't, but if it is available and you don't take it, it doesn't look great, right? So keep in mind, if you're want to show colleges you have both a passion and a skill for a certain area, you need to be pursuing those at the highest level. Now, that is for people applying to Stanford, Harvard, Yale, right? If you take it down a notch, then it's about just taking it in the classes that are of interest to you. More is better when you're applying to those top schools, if you can handle it. If not, pick the ones that matter. English, by the way, AP English, if you're not totally opposed to writing and reading, is great junior year. So AP English language is the one where you learn to write. Colleges love that class because it generally means you're going to be prepared for all college level writing. So that's something that if you're on the fence as a sophomore thinking about next year, and again, this is early, but it's something just to be thinking about. Now, sophomore year APs, when you have those chances, it's a lot of computer science. It's, you have AP histories you can take, sometimes some AP sciences, but just, figure out what your path is going to be. Because when you talk about APs, there's a couple of reasons to take them, right? We talk about showing that you are challenging yourself and you love things and you want to engage. The other reason is that most people are taking a lot more APs. So we're waiting on the 2022 data. They do this every 4 years. But you can see from 2008 to 2018, well, this is not every 4 years, but you get my point. 2022, they're giving us more data. But you break this down, it almost doubled in 10 years, right? And they're expecting it to be over 1.5 million for 2022. More and more people are doing it. It's becoming more common. So for parents, a lot of us look back at that and go, I took 1 or 2, or I took 3. More and more kids are taking multiple. So just know that that's part of it, is that if you're trying to keep up and show that you can handle the challenge, other kids are, so that matters. These are the AP courses that exist. So when we talk about what do you want to take and what's your narrative and what interests you, again, science kids or STEM kids, you've got all the maths and sciences here. You've got a lot of arts. You've got every language, not every language, you got a lot of languages. But recognize again that you want to take the ones that definitely interest you, that you can do well in. If you are applying to those top 10 schools, you're probably going to have mainly APs. And so you may be, a sociology major going in, but you may still take AP calculus, right? To show them that you're just at that level and can handle that rigor. AP scores. One of the biggest questions I hear, and I like to get you guys early as freshmen and sophomores, is whether the scores matter. So people who pick AP classes are like, if I can get an A in the class, does it matter if I do, if I get in 4 or 5, anything like that? Yes. Colleges look at AP scores. This is how they compare you to the rest of the country, right? We talked about your grades compare you to your classmates. AP scores compare you to everyone else. It's a standardized test. So let's just say you took AP US history. So if you take AP US history and you get an A in the class, but you take the AP exam, which is a nationally standardized test, and you get a 2, they're going to question that A. They're going to think your teacher either didn't teach you much, just liked you and kind of rounded up, whatever it is, it doesn't negate the A, but it does make the A look a little suspicious. But it goes the other way, right? So let's say you are a B student, maybe even struggling and maybe even getting a C in an AP class. But if you can get a 4 or a 5 on the exam, college is looking and go, oh, all right, he or she knew the material, right? They understand what's on the test. They understand what they're supposed to know. Maybe they bombed one assignment, or maybe the teacher just didn't like them, right? Whatever it is, it gives context to your grades. So don't go into AP classes thinking it's only the grade that matters. Recognize that it is also the AP exam score. For what it's worth, if you get a 1 or a 2 on your college applications, you get to list what you want to list. 1s and 2s, we don't want to list. You want to pretend they never happened. All right. So 1s and 2s, just you were sick that day. There's a place you can just say, you're not adding that as a list of scores you want to send. 4s and 5s, you will send literally everywhere. There's no college that will not be impressed with a 4 or a 5. 3s are always the only iffy ones for the top schools. 95 to 99% of colleges are going to be very delighted with a 3. 3 is credit, right? It's college credit. It's basically getting like a C or a little bit higher in a college level class, which is perfectly respectable when you're a sophomore or junior in high school, but it's not exceptional, right? So again, keep picking on the Stanford, Harvard, Yales. The 3 is a little, it's not great, but it's not terrible. But if you're on the fence of whether to submit it, the thing to keep in mind is if you don't submit it, they may think you had a 1 or a 2. So I bring this up because when it's time to prep for these exams, take it seriously. Don't assume it's going to come together because you got an A in the class. Sometimes teachers are wonderful at preparing kids for the AP exam. Other teachers don't want to teach to the test, and they want to make sure that they are teaching what they think matters in biology or in chemistry or in history. And then you might not know all the strategies for the exam. So just take this seriously. Okay, one other thing that I kind of skipped over when we were talking about grades. Freshmen. You hear people talk about UCs, Cal States, that they look at GPAs for grades 10 and 11, which is true. So I've heard a lot of students come to us and go, well, freshman year doesn't count. So first of all, UCs and Cal States, it does count. So if it's just not part of the GPA, so they still see your freshman grades. You enter the freshman grades on the application, but the GPA is only 10 and 11. So you might have a very, like if you mess around freshman year and don't do well, then maybe your freshman year grades, aren't that great, but your GPA could be rock star GPA if your 10th and 11th were really strong. That being said, every other school basically in the country takes a GPA of 9 through 11. So if you are thinking that freshman year doesn't matter, again, it matters everywhere to an extent, but only the UCs and Cal States are the ones that don't factor that into your GPA. So I just want to put that out there because we get a lot of kids who come in, tell us their grades freshman year were bad and didn't matter. It does. So keep that in mind. Take it seriously, all of this. Okay, so as we were just talking about standardized test scores, how do you compare to the country, right? Grades, how do you compare to your classmates? This is where we talked about AP exams. I put the breakdown of 40-60, this is kind of made up because it depends on where you're applying and how many APs you have. AP exams are a test of true knowledge, right? Did you retain all of those terms and the facts and the formulas or whatever it is, or the dates if it's history? Do you know how to analyze a passage? There's certain skills and certain material you have to know. SAT and ACT clearly are not quite that. And standardized testing is obviously changing. And for even sophomores and freshmen, we're going to talk about some of the changes that are coming up. But the thing to keep in mind, there are a lot of test blind schools out there. There are also a lot that are now going, not a lot, but there are test schools going back to test required and plenty that are test optional, which means if you don't want to send them, you don't have to, but if it benefits you, you should. So test optional here, just some terms, because you'll hear this a lot as you move on and you start looking at colleges or thinking about this. Schools that are test optional, basically think of it as like an art portfolio, right? For me, I draw stick figures. Me submitting an art portfolio would not help my application. No one would want to accept me because they saw my art. I would not send an art portfolio. If somebody is a great student and a terrible test taker, then you would go test optional. You would probably choose not to send scores. If your GPA is so strong, test scores comparatively would only bring that down, then don't worry about it. However, that's not meant to be a cop-out, because I hear a lot of students being like, well, I don't want to test, right? If you can test and test well, and especially as well or better than your GPA, from like, think of it as a general comparison. There's no chart for this, but if you have, your top 10% of your class, you probably want to be top 10% in your testing scores. But just generally thinking of it that way, don't do it for laziness. Colleges also are looking at the kids who put the effort in. If it's optional, they know that you didn't have to, and they like the kids who do, if it goes well. Test blind. More and more of these exist, and there will be more and more with time. So UCs, Cal States, Caltech, University of San Diego, Pitzer. Notice there's also a lot on the West Coast. It's more common over here. These do not even consider it. So if you got a 1600 on the SAT, then they don't care. Not that they don't care. They'll never see it. It's not even on the application, right? But here's the interesting thing. Test required. Notice Caltech is test blind. They won't consider it. MIT, pretty, relatively equivalent when it comes to difficulty and what they're looking for in an applicant, requires the scores. They went from test optional for a year or two during COVID and said, we're over that. We want scores. We feel like we're getting better applicants when we do that. Georgetown went back to required this year. A lot of Georgia and Florida schools are. And a lot of schools as of now have only announced their policies through 2023. So I bring this up because for those of you on this, which are primarily, I assume, freshmen and sophomores, you don't necessarily know. Some schools have announced policies for, whether it's kind of, for eternity at this point or through 2025. You can look on websites to check that out, but do know that most policies have not been announced. I bring this up because if you're looking at it going, oh, well, my schools are all the schools that are test blind, or I know my schools are test optional. Georgetown was test optional last year. MIT was test optional last year. Now they're test required, but they can go either direction. So if you're in a position to test, it's good to have them in your back pocket. You may send them to a couple schools on your list. You may send them to all the schools on your list. It just depends on where you apply and what's happening that year. But this is definitely something that is shifting every single day, I feel like, at this point. So to break down this test a little bit. So one thing, a lot of people ask us when you should start testing. And I hear some people say, we've been told senior year. Some, obviously, junior year is very common. Here's the reality. It's when you're done with Algebra 2. So if you are taking Algebra 2 as a freshman and you're super advanced in math, then you're ready to take it after freshman year. And we've had plenty of students who have ended up working with us, testing first, fall semester of sophomore year, and are done. They got the score they wanted and they're good to go. Other kids are taking Algebra 2 as a junior. Then that means you don't really have all the math you need for these tests until the end of junior year. So what we like to see, and I think it just takes some of the pressure off, and I'll explain why. But if you think of being, if you're testing fall of senior year, right? So let's say you take Algebra 2 through junior year, you're done in June, you want to prep over the summer before senior year. Not only are you writing your essays, your applications, visiting colleges, doing all this other stuff, but you're trying to build a college list without knowing your scores, which is very stressful for all parties involved. And it's hard to be like, is this a target, a safety, a reach? Is this realistic without knowing kind of where you stand on test scores for a lot of places? But also you have so much on your plate, the odds of you being able to really dedicate yourself to this is slim. So look ahead, look at where you are in math now, look at when you'll be done with Algebra 2. And if you can start again sooner, but if you're going to be taking Algebra 2 as a junior, you can still start prep if you're going to do prep January, February. Start prepping because you still have to review 3 other years of math, all the grammar rules in the English language, reading skills, strategies, pacing, and then you can still be learning Algebra 2 kind of in the background while you're prepping, and then take tests in April or June of junior year. And then hopefully you're done before summer. That's kind of our recommendation. You don't have to, you can easily do it senior year if you want. It just adds stress. The other thing, not to terrorize people with this, because I feel like people get panicked when I say this, but we've had many students, candidly, who've had their scores get lost. So this is something I won't, for now, name names, because I think the test sites are getting better at this, but there are certain sites in LA that have been notorious about proctors either forgetting to mail the answer sheets in or misplacing them. They thought they put them in their trunk and couldn't find them. And those kids don't get scores, and it takes 2 or 3 months to realize the scores never came through. So this is the other reason that we hate to see people test fall of senior year, because that of course is very rare. But when I say very rare, it doesn't feel rare when you're one of them. And I feel like in the last few years, there's been a couple test dates every year at a location in LA, somebody had their scores lost. So don't wait till the last minute. Prepare and know that things can go wrong. They shouldn't, obviously, but they do. Okay, SAT versus ACT. So this is based what we're going to talk about is primarily based on what these tests are today. So we're going to talk about the changes to SAT coming up. So if you are in advanced math, if you're either in Algebra 2 or will be taking it even next year, let's talk about this, because if you want to take the current SAT before they make the changes, it's not the worst idea. But here's the deal with SAT and ACT. If they play to different strengths. Everybody has something different. So you get a lot more time per question on SAT, and it's testing math in a very conceptual, real world. If I'm paying taxes, if I'm buying groceries, if I'm looking at the sticker on a car at a car lot and looking at miles per gallon, depending on the speed I'm going, kind of thing. Those are the math questions you get on SAT. Reading is also more analytical. It's going to be what's the best answer, not what's the right answer necessarily. So a lot of times there's two answers that are both correct, but one of them is better. Since SAT gives you more time per question, some kids like this because they can stop, think through it. Other kids absolutely loathe the way that the reading section is set up, because what's the best answer is very stressful when you're under pressure, because you're like, but they're both right. I know A and C both work, but why one's better than the other, you can get in your own head and waste time, and also just kind of can jar your confidence. ACT, the biggest challenge is that it moves much more quickly. But if pacing is not a huge issue for you, it's more straightforward in every section. Math is more straightforward. Reading is more straightforward. There's actually a right answer that's in the text word for word somewhere. So if it says, where did squirrels live in the wintertime? Line 27 says in the treetops, right? It's going to be there, but it gives you almost half the time, it's like 50% of the time per question. So, or it's 70% of the time, but it's significantly less when you're trying to read all of this and answer the questions. The science section on ACT, people stress out about. The science section does not test science knowledge. So this is the fact that no one likes to hear, and everybody, I get people cranky. My students hate when I mention this. The reality is, one time, because I felt this might be a thing, I had a student who was a 7th grader taking an entrance exam for high school. I gave them the science section just kind of for kicks. I said, I just want to see how you do. It was a younger sibling of a current client. They took it, they missed one question out of 40. It was a 7th grader. So the reason I bring that up, the science section, they knew they didn't know the material. So they would see terms and go, I have no idea what this is. I'm just going to kind of assume based on what it's telling me, or I'm looking at the graph and the chart. That's all this is. It's looking at graphs and charts. It's interpreting data in, all of these different formats, but it's not testing outside knowledge. So what happens in high school is kids now look at the science section going, I learned that in AP biology. And they start trying to figure out what it's asking, or it's something very obvious on the page that you just needed to look at the graph a little more carefully. So I bring that up because people choose SAT instead of ACT because they're scared of the science section. It takes getting used to, it moves fast. I'm not saying it's easy because it is tricky, but it's not about being good at science. It's not about outside knowledge. So as you start thinking what test might be better for you, keep in mind that you might be fine on this if you had, 10 minutes of understanding really what's covered on this. So for you people on this call who are going to be testing, it's the 10th graders will be the first students who have access to the new test. So it comes out in March of 2024. So year and a half, right? It'll be out. They are starting to practice it on the guinea pigs of international students in 2023. And they're going to work out the kinks, see what's working, see what's not, fine tune it. And then a little over a year later, it'll be coming out in March 2024 for you guys. But this is something where it's not to discourage you from taking the new SAT when it comes out. It's that right now, we only know what they're telling us, right? They haven't released practice tests. They haven't released anything, but here's some information that they have shared. So it will be digital. It's going to be on a computer. So it's not a paper test anymore. It's going to still be at testing sites. A lot of people think that means they can take it at home on their laptop, but no. If you don't, school issued devices will be fine. If you want to bring your own laptop, sometimes you can, I think they're supposed to let you bring that, but it's still at a certain official testing site. Test got short. So instead of being a little over 3 hours, it was like 3 hours, 25 minutes. Now it's a 2-hour test. So they are trying to, deal with the fact that people are less fond of standardized tests these days. They're trying to make it more appealing, so they're shortening it. Here's the part that no one likes. It's the adaptive testing. So for any of you who've taken an LSAT or other, grad school tests that are adaptive, what this means is how you do on the easy questions will determine your score. So let's talk about SAT and ACT the way they are now. So ACT is easier, it's more straightforward. So 60 questions. If you miss number 1, but get the next 59 questions right, it's the same score as if you got the first 59 questions right and missed number 60. They don't care which question you missed. They just care how many you got right total. Adaptive testing goes from easiest to hardest. So there's 2 sections for each subject. So if you're on math, the first section will give you, the first question should be the easiest question. Let's say it says, 2 plus 3 and you say 6, you're rushing. The test now thinks you don't know math and is going to give you only easier questions moving forward, and you're going to max out at a certain score. So you cannot afford any kind of silly mistakes on the easy questions. You can't make up for it later. It's adapting to what level they think you're at. So this is also something, if somebody's really careful and doesn't make careless errors, doesn't miss bubble, doesn't any of the things, then this could be a good option. But the adaptive testing is the first adaptive test for anybody not applying to grad school. So kids your age have never had to deal with this. Eventually people will get used to it, but it's going to be new. It's going to be different. So what we're generally recommending to people is, look, you can wait and see over the next years, they start to release materials. If you like this better, how you feel. But the ACT is not really changing, right? And it's not changing it now. There's always a chance they'll announce some small changes, but for now, there's no big changes coming to it. So you know what you're getting. There's a million different things that you can be doing to prep. There's a million practice tests that are relevant. There's going to be limited material, limited prep for the new SAT until they start releasing old tests online. So that's the issues with SAT, ACT. When we talked about timeline, we kind of already touched on this a little bit, but this is kind of standard. By the way, this doesn't mean you're taking it 4 times. It's like, when do you start? But there's usually people are either starting in the summer, taking it in the middle of fall, starting in the middle of fall, taking it around the holidays, starting kind of after the holidays, going through spring, so forth. But again, if you're taking Algebra 2 as a freshman, you can take it sophomore year. And remember, colleges are not tracking, I mean, they see when you took the test, but I had somebody ask if a score you took freshman year or sophomore year would count. Yeah, I think it's 3 or 4 years. So unless you're taking it in 8th grade, it counts. But so recognize that you want to do it when it's fresh. Here's the other thing. If you are really advanced in math, if you take any test, let's just say, or not any test, any math, Algebra 2 freshman year, I'm going extreme. These are the super, super high level math kids. But if you're doing that, and then you've got Algebra 2 freshman year, pre-calc sophomore year, calculus or AP calculus junior year, and then you test, you are now being tested on 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade math, which good luck remembering that. I have so many advanced math kids who don't remember how exponents work or how to add fractions or multiply fractions because they haven't done it in years. So you don't want to let things get too far behind you before you test. So just, again, this is not necessarily a map that needs to be perfect, of your timeline and when you do things and where you go, but it's something to keep in mind. Now, you'll notice PSAT prep is kind of faded out here, as is AP. There's a couple of reasons. AP prep we've talked about, and some people need it, some people don't. Not everyone's taking them. PSAT though, if you're top 10% when you take a cold test, PSAT prep might be worthwhile, especially if you're planning on taking the SAT, because the PSAT is what you take to be eligible for national merit scholarships, right? And being a finalist, semi-finalist, there's money involved. There's just accolades and a nice feather in your cap and something to put on your college applications. If you look at top universities, there's always something that says, X number of national merit finalists in this incoming class. They love to brag about that. If you end up being a semifinalist or finalist, that means you're top 2 to 3%, finalists are top 1%. So if you're not a great tester, prepping for the PSAT is silly, to be honest. It's a waste of time, energy, money. Don't do it unless you're a really strong tester who might end up in the top 1 or 2%, basically. And the PSAT, by the way, does not matter in any other capacity. No one's going to see these scores. Even if you got a perfect PSAT score, colleges never see that score. They only see that you were a national merit finalist. So don't put too much pressure on it. It is good, especially sophomore year, if it's offered to you. Junior year when it's offered, take it. It's good practice and you'll get used to a testing environment. But again, the test's changing, so that might shift a little bit down the line. Okay, enough on testing. Move past this. So this is stuff that is extremely relevant to now. A lot of what we've talked about so far is planning ahead, thinking about what college or what high school looks like when you're trying to get ready for college applications. This is something I want all the students on this call really thinking about when it comes time to pick clubs, to pick sports, to pick, anything you're doing in school, but also out of school. So this is not precise. Again, these are but community impact, the reason this is 50% is this is a phrase that you're going to hear a lot of college admissions reps talk about. And it matters more than a lot of other things. Notice the other three can fall into that category. It basically means, what are you doing to make your community a better place? So when you go to college, is there a void? Is there a hole somewhere? Did you create something? Did you improve something? Are you helping somebody? That's community impact. Are you having an impact on those around you? Volunteer work is community impact to an extent, but let's just say you sign up, you're in the environmental club or save a whale, clean up beaches kind of thing, and you go pick up trash on the beach. That's volunteer work. That's great. And we need that, by the way. This is not a knock. Do it. It's good. But it's not really community impact, because whether you or someone else had done that same job, it's kind of the same thing, right? Somebody just needed to pick up that trash. Community impact is usually when people come up with something that makes the world a better place. And the world could be a certain little club or a group of people at Pali that you feel like are not necessarily, whether they feel marginalized, whether they aren't getting what they need, or you look outside of it. You look at Los Angeles, you look at the country. Now, leadership comes in a lot of different forms too. So when you talk about being a leader, leadership it can be formal, right? It can be you're a captain of something, you're the president of something, you're the founder of something, but it can also be that you just went off and did something on your own, and maybe some people followed, right? Now, notable accomplishments, the reason it's 10% is most kids candidly don't have something incredible, but if you do, it's more than 10%. So if you're winning national awards and you're a nationally recognized journalist, or you have, you're the top, obviously, football recruit, then that's going to be a different issue. But these are the things that colleges are looking at. And so when you're a freshman or even a sophomore, you're not going to be a leader necessarily, right? And it's highly unlikely. But what I encourage you to do at this point in high school is think about these things and try things. Freshman year in particular should be about trying as many things as you're open to. So with the time that you have, join robotics club, join yearbook, join anything, right? Get to learn stuff, because one of the things we always hear is kids say they don't know what their interests are, so how can they pursue them? And my answer is, you won't know your interests until you try things, right? So if you don't know what you like, try stuff, see what you enjoy. Pali has so many options for you. There's so many things you can do. And if it doesn't exist, you can find it elsewhere. Again, as you get older, you might see the need for certain things in certain places. And then you can start creating a club or an organization, or, organize, whether it's fundraisers or have people dedicate time to certain things. It's up to you. And it's also about finding things that truly matter to you. So this does, when we talk about sports, let's talk about athletes here for a second, because I was a diehard high school athlete. I understand that it can dominate time. And colleges get that. However, if you don't end up being a recruited athlete, I bring this up now because this is something we see a lot. When people come to a senior year, they are in a position that they have only volleyball or only soccer. That's all they've had time for. Again, if you're going to be a top volleyball or soccer recruit, that's awesome. That's great. Then you're set. But if you're not, colleges are going to go, so what else do you do? Because you're not going to do that for us. So how else do you spend your time? How else did you help Pali? How else did you help your community? Right. So I want you just thinking of it as, if you're an athlete, a musician, an artist, whatever you do it well, love it, spend your time on it, but don't forsake all the other things. All right. It's very easy to kind of overlook some stuff. So this is what it looks like on the college application. I bring this up because people sometimes think they're going to write this amazing essay about one of their activities. And the reality is you also may not. It depends on which colleges are asking prompts about this sort of thing. But this is what's on the Common App. And the UC application is pretty similar, to be honest. So notice here, it's what grades, right? So grades 9, 10, 11, 12, how many grades did you do it? Time spent, hours per week, weeks per year. Did you do it during the school year? Did you do it over the summer? What positions did you hold? So were you a treasurer or a captain or a president or a founder? Or if it's a job or something like that, which we'll talk about in a second, who's the employer? If it's a sport, were you varsity? And then notice the second line that says activity with the blank. It might be very small on your screen, but the bottom, the longer blank of each line says activity. You get 150 characters to describe this activity. So the reason I emphasize that is that if you did something really difficult to explain and interesting and kind of intricate in how you'll make it clear out, you did stem cell research and you came up with this thing and you traveled here, it's not going to fit. So when you're doing this, just start, first of all, thinking now, how do you simplify this? Maybe you break it up. Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, or now Scouts, any of those, it's actually something where a lot of students, we say break it up into two, right? Have one line where it's more the administrative side, positions held, if you're managing meetings, if you're, a patrol leader, things like that. And another one more about campouts and, leadership out in the field or getting badges or your Eagle Project or Gold Award, right? Things like that. You might split them up because there's not room to put everything on one. But this is something that you get 10 of these on the Common App. You get a little bit more on the UCs. So again, if you're an athlete that all you've done is sports and you get 10 of these, it doesn't look great to leave everything blank. So speaking of jobs, when I was talking about who the employer is, one of the things colleges love to see, and the UCs in particular love to see, is that you are taking a job that is not, you're not working at a law firm for $30 an hour, answering phones or filing for your uncle, right? You are bagging groceries, scooping ice cream, you're a Subway sandwich artist, right? Do something that's a little humbling and shows work ethic, and shows that somebody who's not related to you isn't firing you. Maybe they, show that you went from being somebody who is stocking shelves to running cash registers to opening and closing the store. That counts a lot. So whether, some people, have to work because they need to help support their families. Others have families who are saying, don't work, we want you focusing on grades. Every family is different. Every situation is different. But this is also something that if you did grow up with privilege, colleges like it even more, because it shows that not everything was handed to you and that you've had some real life experiences. So keep this in mind in the summers. During the school year, obviously is tough, especially if you're taking rigorous courses or have other activities. But some people work at, Toppings in the Palisades and work once or twice a week, and that's great. But do recognize that people oftentimes think that, those top 10 schools aren't going to want to see that. Every school is going to want to. It doesn't matter how difficult it is to get in, how highly or low it's ranked. They're going to want to see like paid work that is legitimate paid work. One thing that you will hear a lot of people talk about is babysitting and camp counseling. So I say this as somebody who's, my primary stuff back in high school was babysitting and counseling. So I get it. And summer counsel, like camp counselor sort of stuff. But a lot of kids do those things. And I'm not saying don't do it. Do what you love and enjoy it and babysit. It's awesome and good money. And so camp counseling is a blast, especially if it's at a camp you've been to. But recognize that the number of kids who have that sort of stuff on their application is very high. So it's hard to make it unique or help you stand out because of it. So just like everything else in this entire process, you want to go through this doing what you enjoy, right? You want to go through this saying, I actually want to do this. I don't care if it looks good to colleges. I'm going to spend time on it. That's fine. That's healthy. Enjoy high school. But you also need to be keeping in mind, if you're doing something because you think it looks good. I have kids who, freshman, sophomore year are saying, should I stick with violin? I hate it, but my mom wants me to keep playing, right? The question is, what are you going to do with that free time if you drop it? So it's not yes or no. It's not you have to finish and go through senior year. It's if you drop it, maybe that's 5 more hours a week. So now you have 5 hours a week to spend doing something more productive. It could be that you enjoy, hopefully, right? Whether it's a job, whether it's volunteer work, whether it's joining clubs, sports, whatever. So keep all of this in mind. So again, freshman year, you're trying as much as you can. Sophomore year, you might be like, okay, I think I want to focus more on STEM, or I think I want to focus more on, maybe you loved STEM, but now you're realizing you care more about the medical track, or you care more about engineering and robotics. You start kind of funneling. You're not dropping everything else unless you dislike it, right? If you're done with it, sure, drop it. It's fine. But you're starting to kind of hone in on the thing that's going to be your calling card. So this is candidly one element of the application process that I don't like. It's a change from when we all applied. Back when I applied, if you were well-rounded, that's all that mattered, right? So if you were a good student with good test scores, you played a sport, musical instrument, and were on student council or student government, you were going to the top 5, top 10 schools, right? That was pretty much expected. What has shifted greatly in the last 10 years, and even more so kind of in the last 5, I would say, colleges want kids who have an area of expertise or a particular passion, which I dislike, because to me, college is when you should be exploring and figuring out what you love and what matters to you. But colleges want a well-rounded class, not necessarily well-rounded individuals. And if you think of this from looking at an application, in some ways it makes sense, and in some ways it's kind of them being lazy. They're trying to build a class that's going to be very, compelling and interesting, and all these people from different backgrounds. But part of it is also it's much easier for them to look at this, be like, holy cow, this kid did what? And they've won 13 national poetry competitions, and now you're the poetry kid, right? And you've done this, or you were into robotics and you started building dog wheelchairs for shelter dogs, right? Now you have a thing. You have something that makes you unique, as opposed to I like STEM and I took physics, right? Or I joined the robotics club. It's like you've created an initiative. You did something different. So sophomore year, you start to kind of say, where am I headed with this, right? And what do I think I want to do? Junior year is generally when you start saying, how do I have leadership positions? How do I pursue these interests in more unique ways? That includes summer programs. That includes after school, weekend stuff. Again, where you're applying does factor into how much is expected of you. So this is always tough, because if you're applying to those top 10 schools, you need to be doing as much as possible. There's no point where I'll say that's enough, because you're trying to differentiate yourself from the best applicants in the world, literally. If you're applying to most schools in the country, they like seeing that you have a few things you enjoy, one in particular that is kind of your calling card, and that it's easier when they're sitting around the table kind of advocating for, or not, for their kid that they have the application file on. If they can articulate, this is the kid that blank, and fill that blank in, you're going to do much better. Because if they don't know who you are, it's because on your activities list and on your essays, you didn't really make it clear who you were. So just think you're starting to try to define your narrative. Again, this should be authentic. The phrase we always use is authentic but unique. I want to make sure that as you're trying stuff, maybe freshman year is a little less authentic, because maybe you don't know what you like and you're pretty sure you don't like journalism, but try it, right? Make yourself go out, try stuff that you're not sure about, and you might come back and go, yep, hate it. That's fine. But as you move along, you are trying to pick the thing that says, look, if I'm going to spend my time on something, what is that going to be, right? And how am I going to do that? So we'll talk about this a little bit more. And I think there's plenty of questions on this, but every grade, you're just starting to try to figure out what that narrative is. And again, authentic but unique. So just to point out, let's say you're interested in medicine. One thing I always hear is that I'm good. They're applying, top schools, Johns Hopkins and Stanford and all these schools, and they've volunteered at a hospital. And they're like, I've done 100 hours at Cedars-Sinai. It's wonderful. Again, not saying don't do it. Do it. It's important. But most kids applying to those top schools have done that too. So now it's what else have you done, right? And on what level and how different. So as a freshman or a sophomore, you're not worrying about that yet, but you are starting to think about what that might be by the time you're a junior. Because remember, you're applying at the beginning of senior year. So you don't have as much time to develop your story once senior year starts. You're starting to submit applications only a couple months in. So keep this all in mind here. Okay, this is something else that with letters of rec, I'm telling you guys this now, even though it isn't necessarily relevant to freshman, sophomore year, it can be. A lot of colleges want and require a junior year letter of rec. Others say we want one junior year letter of rec, but we're willing to take one from other years in addition. But if you have somebody freshman year and junior year, or sophomore year and senior year, right, then they care a little less because it's somebody who knows you, has seen your growth, all this. So side note, letters of rec do not go to UCs or Cal States. They don't have time for that paperwork, so they're not going to read these. But this is the cover page of any letter of rec that people have to fill out. So if you're picking a teacher who's going to fill this out, this is probably hard to read, so I'll help anybody who's got bad eyes. Thank heavens I've got this blown up on my screen. But you'll notice that the things that this teacher is going to rank you on, or your coach or whomever's filling this out, everything from academic achievement, intellectual promise, quality of writing, creative original thought, productive class discussion, respect accorded by faculty, disciplined work habits, maturity, motivation, leadership, integrity, reaction to setbacks, concern for others, self-confidence, initiative, independence. It's not, are you good at this subject? So when you get to senior year, people are like, I want my AP biology teacher to write my letter of rec because I got an A in that class. That is not a good letter of rec necessarily. Might be, but you want a teacher who really knows you and can speak to this type of thing. So I bring this up now because we see kids too late in high school that they didn't put effort into getting to know their teachers. So if you come to class, even if you get an A in the class, if you sit in the back, you don't raise your hand, you don't engage, you don't ask questions, you don't look genuinely excited, it's not going to turn into a great letter of recommendation, candidly. But even if you struggle in the class, but they see your work ethic and they see you trying to help classmates and staying late and coming in at lunch to ask questions and try to learn the material, that's going to be a better letter of rec. So as you are going through high school, keep this in the back of your mind and realize that maybe you have a teacher freshman year that you love. Depending on where you apply, that letter may not be accepted because it was a freshman year teacher. Others will be delighted. It just depends on the schools you're applying to. But looking at the rankings or the ratings at the top. So it goes all the way from below average, all the way up to one of the top few I've encountered, top 1%. What they're trying to get at here, and by the way, they do track this. I've had somebody ask if they actually pay attention to what teachers say. Yes, they have records of this teacher from this high school. If they put top 1% for everybody they write letters for, they disregard that teacher's letters because they know he's just trying to make everybody look good. Good teachers are going to put most kids in the middle columns and say, yeah, good. Obviously, hopefully not below average if they're writing a letter of recommendation. But your job is to find the people that will think of you as top 10%, top 5%, top 1%, not average or slightly above average. You want people who are going to speak highly of you. This comes, and we're going to talk about, starting to pay attention to what might make good essays down the line, what matters. But one thing that I've heard from admissions people, letters of recommendation and personal statements, they read to decide if they want this candidate. I love this phrase. This was from one admissions rep. So to decide if they want this applicant to date or room with his son or daughter. By the way, he doesn't even have a son or daughter. But his point was, are you a good person? Are you somebody we want in our community? Do we trust you? Are you going to be compassionate and kind and motivated and encourage others and be a team player? So your letters of rec and your essay topics are building that. It's, again, not just about academic prowess. All right. So again, as you go through high school, especially those of you who are sophomores, you're more likely to get away with a sophomore letter. But then when you get to junior year, now it really matters. So start focusing on who might be people that can write these for you in the coming years, and just don't go into junior year forgetting about this, or even sophomore year. This should be kind of at the forefront of your mind. And also, by the way, you learn more when you engage in class, so do that anyways, but it also yields better letters. All right, so essay prompts. Again, you guys are young, I get that, but I bring this up because the number of seniors who melt down when it comes time to write essays because they don't know what to write about, they don't have anything to kind of pull from. These are topics. So Common App has these 7 prompts, you pick one. Then every college that you end up applying to has their own supplemental questions. So some people think if you're applying on the Common application, you have one essay. That is highly unlikely. Most schools have 2 or 3 additional questions that they want answered in addition to this one. So just as you setting expectations on that. But this is everything from tell us about a background, identity, or interest that your application would be incomplete without it. Lessons you've learned from obstacles or how you faced failure and how did it affect you. When you questioned or challenged a belief or idea, something that someone has done for you that made you happy or thankful, how this gratitude affected you, discussing an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself or others. Number 6 is a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? And 7 is anything else. It's a topic of your choice. So we have, you're again young for this, so you don't need to be attending this one particularly, but we have a webinar coming up on how to write good personal statements. We have 2 presenters. One's going to talk about how you can do it by picking a prompt and coming up with ideas and brainstorming from there. The other will say you can also come up with great ideas and figure out how to fit them to the prompt. So the reason that I think this is relevant for you at such a young age is to be thinking about this over the coming years. Write it down. I would say write in a journal, but I don't know how many people do that these days. Put it in notes on your phone. It's fine. Think of moments. You want to be paying attention to moments that were profound, that impacted you, positive or negative. When were you proud? When did you have a realization? When did you maybe have a more mature outlook on the world? So an example I always give, and in the coming years, as you see things, I'll always reference this because it's my all-time favorite essay. And I think it gives a great kind of sense of what this is. I had a kid who went and helped rebuild homes in New Orleans after Katrina. Tells you also how long ago this was. But was trying to came back, wanted to write an essay on that. And he's like, I want to talk about how lucky I am to have a roof over my head and a safe place to live. Like, no, that's generic. Like, you should have known you were lucky before you went, first of all. And it's not that interesting. Of course, you realize that going there. So we went back and forth on all these different ideas. And then he started trying to tell anecdotes, and he came up with the fact that it was a predominantly Black neighborhood, was a bunch of white kids from West LA at a private school who came out, and he said we weren't really welcome there. He's like, and people weren't happy to see us. And he goes, and there were a lot of racial slurs yelled at us. And I was like, all right, better, but not necessarily in a personal statement. So then finally he told a story. And the reason I'm telling you this is I want you to pay attention in life for moments like this. So the story that he ended up telling me that turned into one of the best essays I've read in 20 years was, there was one woman in particular who just yelled at him all day, hated that they were there, told him to get out of her neighborhood. They were fine. And the last day they had extra energy efficient light bulbs. And they looked, her car was gone. They thought she was gone. My student got nominated to go drop them off on her doorstep, all these extra energy efficient light bulbs so that she could have them. Turned out she was home, and she opened the door, saw him, started to yell at him for being on her porch, saw what he was doing, burst into tears. And his essay, actually get choked up. It was so great. It was about how everyone has pride. No one wants to need help. She was at like the lowest point in her life and felt like she needed a knight in shining armor to rescue her and hated it. And it changed the way he viewed the world. And that sounds so big, but it was. And so when he started talking about it, he said in that moment, he goes, before that, I felt like, well, these people should be grateful that we're here, right? We're spending 2 weeks of our summer coming out to help them. Like, why aren't they more grateful? And this realization of how humans actually are, right? No one wants to need help. No one wants to be a charity case. And so the compassion that kind of turned into in the way he lived his life after that. And that was the point of the essay, and he got in everywhere at all the top schools. But I bring this up because you will have a lot of experiences over the next few years. And it's very easy to lose sight of what matters. I hear people regularly say, oh, I blew my knee. I'll talk about that. That was a big, something I had to overcome, right? As an obstacle or a setback or a failure. Maybe, but usually that's also a topic that a lot of people write about. It's probably not going to be that compelling or that unique. But pay attention to these moments. And parents, for those of you on this call, help your kid write these things down. And so when they come home and tell you a story at the dinner table of something that happened that made you kinder or more humble, or humility is something that they always love to see, but also maybe more confident, right? Anything that kind of changed you. It's those moments. It's not big picture. It's not I went and built houses or rebuilt houses in Katrina. It's a moment and then a simple energy, like an exchange with another person, seeing something, doing something. But pay attention to those. So in the coming years, just start a journal, start notes. When you are a senior, you're going to be so happy. You're going to be happy with me. You're going to be happy with yourself. You're going to be delighted because you're writing dozens of essays generally. And when you have all these ideas to pull from, think of moments that you showed leadership. Think of moments you had failure. All of these things, write them down. And your senior year, the summer before and the fall of, when you're writing all these essays and applications, it's going to be a lot easier. So this is something that's broad. And again, every school is a little different, but I bring these up because when you're younger, paying attention to how these factor in. So portfolios and auditions. If you are a talented artist or musician or actress or filmmaker or whatever it is, call these talent-based majors, right? Those are going to carry a ton of weight. I put 20% because, again, for a normal English major type person, it doesn't matter as much. Right? But if you're applying as an art major, your portfolio matters way more than 20%. So this is something that if you are an artist, if you are a filmmaker, don't think you're going to apply to colleges and just check the box for, I want to apply to your film major without a reel, without sample. If you want to be screenwriting and be studying screenwriting, you should be screenwriting now. They want to see what you've written. They want to see, short films that you've shot. They want, if you're doing art, the portfolios, they want a lot of stuff. Some want there to be a cohesive theme, as if you had a show in an art gallery. What's the theme and how do these pieces fit together? Others are like, give us 2 oil paintings, 2 sculptures, 2 whatever, send us photos. It depends. So starting to build these things and thinking about them now will mean you might have something really incredible to submit by the time you go. And clearly, any kind of art, whatever you're doing now as a freshman, even a sophomore, it's going to get better throughout high school. But you don't want to be going into senior year going, uh-oh, I need to write like 3 short films and suddenly shoot them and do all this stuff. You won't have time and it won't be done well. So be thinking of that. Athletic recruitment. Again, it's 20% because it depends on how good you are and where you're applying, right? If you're incredible, it's going to carry a lot more than 20%. For some schools, it's more of a thumb on the scale, where if they're on the fence about you, but you can play soccer, they're great. But the one thing I point out, for those of you who are really good athletes and really good students, you can go to exceptional colleges. So of course, there are amazing people who are literally amazing at both, right? But if you're just very good at both, you can go to the Ivies. Like we work with a ton of athletes who play in the Ivy League, and it's like, you know what? They're not the best athletes in the world. They're really good though. The best athletes are going to go to the D1 big state schools, right? That may not, some of them obviously have great academics, but not all, depends. But Ivies care about, you need to be able to hack it here academically, but we need somebody who's also good at this sport. And some of them have an amazing golf program or amazing crew, and there's certain programs that are much better than others. But I bring up the Ivies only because so many people think you have to be incredible at everything. I've seen more than I can count the number of kids who have A's with several B's, maybe even a C. Try not to get the C's, but are good students, not great, have taken several APs, have good test scores, not exceptional test scores, and are really good at volleyball or really good at soccer. Then they are now playing at Dartmouth or Columbia or wherever. So don't lose track, but be aware. We also have, there will be a webinar, which if you saw on the thing, on athletic recruitment. So if you're even considering this path at all, it's good to go in and understand the timeline, because the rules for NCAA, D1 versus D2 versus D3, what it means, what life is like, how it's going to be different, and what you should be doing in the next few years. All of that also varies by sport and gender, by the way, too. So if you are playing, football, you're going to be recruited a lot earlier than if you're like a fencing person or, javelin thrower. They get recruited later. So athletic recruitment can factor in a lot. So demonstrated interest, it depends on the college, but I bring this up now too, for those of you who are thinking about colleges, maybe want to visit colleges. One of the best things you can do, and this is, parents, you're welcome to do this, but students, you're the ones who really need to do this. Let's say you're excited about pick a school, whether it's Stanford, whether it's Boulder, you're excited about going to a particular school. Get on their website tonight, sign up for their newsletters, their info. They're going to send you emails after email. Like, you're going to get so many over the next few years. You're going to be your inbox will be unhappy with me. But here's the thing. They are tracking it's big brother all. Yeah, it's in that way kind of bad, but it's also good for you if you're on top of this. They're tracking when you sign up for the emails. So how early were you showing them you were interested in? Were you opening the emails? And were you clicking on links in the email? So don't just sign up and ignore all the emails and let them pile up in your inbox. That's probably worse than signing up at all. But what I recommend is, if you have these top schools that you know at a younger age you're excited about, sign up, do the virtual info sessions or tours, start getting that information, and create folders for each school that you're interested in. And so University of Michigan, file any emails that are relevant to your particular interests in the Michigan folder, because come senior year, you need to write, why do you want to go to Michigan? And if you can say, well, you hired this amazing new professor who's doing research in my exact field of study, or this new high-tech building with a 3D lab that'll allow me to X, Y, and Z. All of these things that they're bragging about, they're proud of. So if you mention in your essay how you're excited about that too, and that's amazing, they're going to love it. So, and it also shows them, somebody's like, wasn't it obvious you just read the email? Yeah, that's also a good thing, right? You're doing your homework, you're paying attention. So file them away. You can delete the ones that are irrelevant to you after you've read them, throw them through. So you don't want to do this for 100 colleges, because you're going to get buried. And by the way, when you do take SAT or ACT, even PSAT, you get on college lists and people will start sending you information. Unsubscribe from the ones you're positive you don't want, so your inbox isn't cluttered. But one of the things that matters is picking the right email address. And that sounds silly, but first of all, there's like, pick appropriate ones. I've had students with like gangster4life@gmail.com. Don't put that as your college email. And so, because whatever you put when you're signing up for stuff right now is the stuff, or is the email address that you need to put on your application. So if you use different email addresses, they don't know you're the same person. And this is also why it's important that it's the student's email address, not just the parents, because they don't care about if the parents are reading stuff. They care if the kid is. So make sure, if you don't have, some kids, by the way, like to set one account only for college, and that can become your professional email address down the line. Maybe it's firstname.lastname@gmail.com, right? Create that, use that, sign up for things. And then again, come senior year, everything's going to one place that's clean. But don't, if you change email addresses halfway through, you kind of lost all the momentum you built up, because they now no longer know it's the same person. So there's that. Demonstrated interest. There's also formal and informal demonstrated interest. So some colleges, it's actually a category that they, if you apply and have never visited, have never done an info session, have never signed up for emails, you're probably not going to get in candidly at those schools, because they're like, you can't be that serious about us, right? If you were excited about us, you would have visited, you, or not even necessarily flown across the country, but done a virtual tour online, right? The fact that you're not doing work, some schools, it's actually a percentage of the application that they're considering. And if they see no effort being put in on your part, you're done. However, the informal demonstrated interests are the schools that technically say, we do not consider demonstrated interest in a formal capacity. Where that gets a little gray and a little shady. Think of a school, you live in Los Angeles. You are applying to pick a school in Maine, you're Bowdoin, or you're applying to Cornell or these other schools in the middle of nowhere, Northeast. If you've never stepped foot in that part of the country, and especially if they can look at where you are and see, they can see address, they can see income for parents. If you can't afford it, that's different, right? But if you're clearly able to fly out and you never did, it's not about interest. It's about them going, I don't know if she's going to want to live here, right? So if you aren't proving to them, oh no, I know the area, I've been here, I love it. And let's say you cannot afford to go, that's fine. Are you doing those info sessions and tours? Are you taking time? Are you even reaching out to admissions to talk to current students about programs or life in the snow, right? Whatever it is, prove to them that you are actually in a position to build, like to not only go if they accept you, but stay. Because the reality is the kids that generally transfer out of Cornell or out of Bowdoin or those types of schools are Californians because they couldn't handle the weather or they couldn't handle how isolated these schools were. So you need to prove to them that you're going to be okay. But I bring that up because if you ask them, they're going to say, oh, no, demonstrated interest isn't factored in, but this is how they still view it, right? It's like, if you are actually doing your homework and know that you will like an existence that is very different than the one you currently have. All right, the other three, social media. So I put it as 10% because if you have normal social media, it's not a big deal. It can help you, it can hurt you. If you're young, if you're freshmen and sophomores, you have time to build a social media account that is like LinkedIn and photos, right? So you could build one that is meant to be like you in a hard hat with a shovel, smiling with your friends at, Habitat for Humanity, or picking up trash on the beach or at a nice dinner with your siblings and your parents. They are going to look at you and see you're somebody who is they care about family, they care about friends, you're social, but not too social. If you have a social media account that is the opposite and is a lot of partying and a lot of hardcore stuff that you may not want admissions looking at, recognize that over 80% of colleges now look at social media. I had a conversation earlier today with the student who's melting down about that. She's like, but I swear I'm on private. I said, true, perhaps, and they may not be able to see it, and that's fair, but it's not always as private as people think, because oftentimes there's settings like friends of friends can see what you have. So if one of your friends follows or is followed by the university because they attend it, now all of a sudden your account can be fair game. And it depends on the platform, it depends where you're at. But it doesn't have to be a bad thing. And this is where I know if you have social media, for those of you who don't, congratulations, that's impressive and I'm in awe of you. But then that's fine, you don't have to have social media, but you could also use this as an opportunity to just build something that looks great and makes you look impressive and interesting, and know that they're going to go digging. If they're on the verge of accepting you, this is one of the last steps. It's like, think about it, parents, when you're applying for a job, usually the last step is calling references. This is kind of their equivalent, right? It's like, what can we find about you online? And are you somebody we want in our community? So use it to your advantage if you can. If you're opposed to having social media or you have shady stuff on social media, just be positive nobody can find it. And I would encourage you not to put shady things on social media. It's amazing what the internet can find and what is not forgotten. So just be smart throughout high school. There's, for those of you, you're at Pali and it's a few years before your time, but there was a huge scandal a few years ago where several kids lost, they were already accepted to college, they were seniors, it was towards the end of senior year, and there was a bad Instagram post and somebody screenshotted what somebody said and the photo and sent it to all of these kids' colleges, and colleges rescinded their offer. So it's not just about what you think people can see. As if you have any enemies or anybody who doesn't really like you, they may go to that effort. And I mean, candidly, it clearly has happened. We've seen it happen sadly multiple times. So people can be a little vindictive. So don't give people the opportunity to take screenshots of things who are friends with you and kind of, put you in a bad position. Interviews, it depends on where you're applying. State schools don't do interviews. Some private schools don't do interviews also. The smaller the school, the more likely they are to do interviews. Here's the thing, if it's optional, it's mandatory, do it. If it's required, do it. But a lot of them are waiting to see how, it's the demonstrated interest to an extent. How excited are you? How on top of things are you? Did you even realize you could register for an interview, right? So start paying attention to those things, but know that if they have them, so if you, again, sophomores, next year, maybe you're visiting colleges more, some schools let you do your interviews as early as junior year. Others, it has to be after July, right before senior year. Others, it's after you apply senior year. It just depends. But your interview, if it's offered and you don't do it, like you choose not to sign up, some schools don't care that much. Others will ding you, and they really care. I've had admissions reps say that the reason they rejected a kid was that they didn't bother to sign up for an interview, even though their website says it's optional. So optional means mandatory in all things college applications. Keep that in mind. So the other 20%, high school reputation relationship. You go to a great school. Pally's awesome. They have good relationships. They send kids to all the top schools. But this is also something that is on some level out of Pally's control too. Every high school, same thing. So let's just say this year's or last year's seniors who just go to college this year and they're a complete disaster at pick a school, right? Some university, 3 Pally kids went, they're either flunking out or partying too much and they don't reflect well on the school, especially private schools, private colleges. They're likely to then be hesitant to take as many Pally kids, right? Or any other school. There's actually a West Side private school, very good one, that is now going on year 22 without Duke accepting anyone. So somebody burned a bridge somewhere, and these are kids getting into the top Stanford, Harvard type schools. And Duke is like, never again, we hate your school. So this happens. Why? There's a few going on there that no one understands, but just know that there are some things out of your control, and it isn't necessarily about your specific high school. It can be about the students who've gone. Same thing if somebody older than you breaks an ED agreement, which is when you apply, there's some schools have an option to sign a contract saying, if you accept me, I will go, which is a contract, and you're expected to go. And if you break that contract, they will oftentimes penalize the school because the school counselors had to sign off on that, vouch for you, say that you and your family would honor this. So there are a lot of reasons this can go wrong. There's also a lot of ways this can go right? So Pally, the UCs in particular, is an amazing relationship there, and Pally kids thrive and do great at the UCs. So keep that going. Hope everything keeps going well. You're going to have a better chance of getting into the UCs than kids from other high schools who maybe where the kids got there, they struggled a little bit more. So all of these miscellaneous factors that you're seeing, these are things to just be aware of now. You're not necessarily doing too much. By the way, start visiting colleges. You don't have to travel the world. You live in Los Angeles. So do in like info sessions, virtual tours, in-person tours, do campus tours, go to USC, UCLA. I always recommend people go to LMU, Occidental, Claremont colleges, go down to Orange County and look at Chapman. View as many schools as you want. Even if you know you want to leave Los Angeles, it gives you the opportunity to be thinking about this freshman, sophomore year in a way that when it comes time to start narrowing down your college list, you already know kind of what you like. But take good notes. The number of times I've heard parents and students fight about the kids like, I hated that school. And the parents like, no, you loved it. And it goes both ways. And that's great because that was a year ago and no one knows now if that kid loved or hated that school. Somebody's wrong. So write notes down, but don't just say like the campus. Take detailed notes. What did you like about the campus? Was it pretty? Was it spread out? Was it nice and consolidated and condensed? Did it have access to a bunch of bars and restaurants and cafes? Was it surrounded by nature? Because then your list, it's just like we talked about narrowing your focus on activities. Your college list should start to develop the same way, where if you realize you hate something that's too urban or something that's too rural or too big or too small, you start eliminating colleges and focusing on ones that are a good fit for you. So that's the other stuff. As freshmen, sophomores, you're too early to be going to like trying to decide your top choice, but you're not too early to start learning about colleges and what they look for, what they require. And, you know, we talked briefly at the beginning about APs and honors and what they care about. But as you look at colleges, you'll go to the info sessions, they'll talk about this. They'll tell you how important certain things are and what they value. And know that, you know, for instance, the UCs, you've got 4 letters of recommendation, 4 essays, no letters of recommendation. So they're not getting outside perspective. They want you to just tell them about you. So what you've done in high school influences and obviously informs those essays. So that is all you've got basically, and your activities you get to list. Cal State, I point out, as of now, by the time you apply, who knows, maybe it'll have changed, but for the last 15 years, no essays, no letters of rec, and no place to put your activities. Cal Poly San Luis Obispo has one question, at least in the past years, which is, are you involved in extracurricular activities? Yes or no? And if you say yes, is it 0 to 1 hours, 2 to 3 hours? Then it's like up to like 6+ hours a week. And if you say 6+ hours a week, they're like, that's all we need to know. Thanks. And that's it. You're not going to get to list that you were captain of this or president of this or this amazing research you did. So I bring this up because if you're just dead set on going to a Cal State, recognize that certain things matter, certain things don't. If you care about private schools, they care more about what are you doing in your community? How are you impacting it? How involved are you at Pali? Because they look at that to say, how involved will you be when you get to their campus, right? So if you're a genius, but all you do is sit in the library, colleges aren't going to want you, right? They want kids who are going to make their community and their student body better and contribute to it. So that's the other reason to think of when you're younger and doing things now, they want to see that that's kind of your drive and how you think. So that's a lot. And I know I threw a lot at everyone here. I do think this is something where, you know, as freshmen, sophomores, I'm hoping I didn't stress you out. Hopefully this gave you more information to go with, but I see we've got a lot of questions. So let's answer some of those. Can you get that started for me, Lauren?
Absolutely. One we have is, how important is it to take college classes as dual enrollment at Pali?
So, okay, great question. So I think, and this is something that Karen, Alice, if you talk to them or your academic counselors, I feel like dual enrollment can mean different things. So dual enrollment, sometimes there are some classes, I think there's 5 classes that Pali counts for dual enrollment, like 8 psychology, because there is no AP Psych class at the moment. It's great, but it depends on which class and what colleges you're applying to, because you could take, usually those are going to be the classes that Pali doesn't offer or are easier to take over the summer, things like that. It's a benefit because college level obviously is meant to be harder than high school. But if they offer an AP, like I have some students who are saying, can I, instead of taking AP US history at Pali, can I just take US history at SMC or even UCLA over the summer or whatever it is? You can, but AP US history is actually probably a better choice in some ways, because it will give you, they know what skills you're learning. So they know exactly what that curriculum is and that you're going to be ready to analyze papers or, you know, texts and stuff when you get to college that you wouldn't have otherwise done in a college class necessarily. So the dual enrollment is very limited. It's great for certain subjects. And by the way, we'll go through the questions, but keep in mind, if you have questions that are more specific to your kid or to your family, and it's either private or it's very niche, I do 30-minute one-on-one consults. They're free. It's not a sales pitch. Just come in. I love to chat with families and I can answer questions that are maybe more specific and precise. And I have more background on that. All right, next question.
Yes. What about taking the AP test, taking the AP class, but opting not to take the test? How is that viewed by colleges?
So it's not great is the candid answer. It's not the end of the world, but they don't necessarily know when you opt out or chose not to submit scores. All they see is there's a page on applications that's share any AP scores you wish to share. So if you took an AP class and did not share your scores, they don't necessarily know that you chose not to test. But the reality is either way, it's kind of hurting you because you're not giving them that context to be able to compare you to the country. You're only being compared to your classmates. And they don't know how easy or hard your teacher is in that capacity. So it's better to take an AP class and opt out of the AP exam than to not take the AP class at all. But I would strongly recommend you put the effort into the AP exam and take it.
Okay, our next question is about Algebra 2. Their child took it last year as a 9th grader, and they're wondering, should they take the ACT now?
So this is probably is the answer. I think part of it, one thing we didn't talk about, I'll get back to that question because this is kind of related. So anybody who gets accommodations, so if you have, you're eligible for extended time, any accommodations, if you have an IEP, a 504, anything where you have that already in place at Pali, keep in mind, SAT, if you have a note from a doctor, basically, they're going to honor extended time. ACT has a much more rigorous process, and they need to see accommodations in place at your high school for 12 months, which have to come with a neuropsych evaluation, all these things. Then they will give you extended time on ACT. So I'll answer that question in a moment. But the reason I bring that up is that some people might be ready to test, but if you needed extended time or accommodations, you might have to wait 12 months if you don't have the formal paperwork in place at school or, with doctors. So that's something also to keep in mind. If that's something you're thinking you might need to apply for or you're eligible for, get on that sooner rather than later, because you're going to need it if, eventually if you're testing. But anyway, so to answer your question, yes, if you don't need accommodations, or if you do and you already have all of that in place, start now. One of the things that we recommend is if you're choosing between SAT and ACT, taking practice tests in both is one thing, but understanding why you're missing what you're missing is more important. So, there's plenty of, I know Compass does a great job. We do it. There's other companies, but not just comparing your scores, looking at why you're missing what you're missing and which test is actually playing to your strengths and kind of minimizing your weaknesses. So do you move fast enough? Do you make careless errors? All of those things. And seeing if you're, again, maybe just were a little rushed that day and didn't pay attention or didn't understand what science was asking, then you might need to hold off and do more prep before you test. But you also, just as long as you know what test you're going after and you're confident that's the right one, you can start yesterday. It just make sure you do. Oh, this is the other thing. There are some schools that require you to send all test dates. Not many, but they still exist. And it's become a problem for some kids who, the parents told them just take it a few times and let's see how you do. We generally recommend you want to max out it 3 times, 2 times for sure. Unless you get a perfect score, you're taking it twice. 3rd time is there if you want it. And hopefully you don't need it, or if you need it, but then you're kind of done after that. You're not going to get much better. So if you start now, don't just go take it in October to see how you do. Make sure you're taking a full-length practice test, seeing how it goes before you just sign up blindly. Because if you take it to see how you do and don't do well, that score may automatically go to colleges.
Okay, our next one is, do you believe it would be too stressful to apply for a transfer community college during junior year to hopefully be able to transfer to a UC after graduation?
Oh, that's a good question. This is a horrible answer, but it depends. So it's not necessarily too stressful. And there are kids, I know there's a kid at Pali, I think is either a senior this year or was last year, who had enough credits by the end of high school, had 60 credits and was able to transfer to UCLA as a junior after leaving Pali. So he was doing all these classes simultaneously at SMC while at Pali. It's doable. It's not usually advised, and usually it's hard to do well, but it's very possible. So that's something, talking to your school counselor and looking at your schedule. And again, making sure you're not overdoing it, because if you do overdo it, your grades suffer, then you're not necessarily going to get into a 4-year college straight away. And your community college transcripts can be a little bit messy. This is also something I've had kids take 1 or 2 classes or 10 classes, whatever it is, at community colleges to get more experience. If you bomb something or don't take it seriously enough, if you ever go back to SMC, your record has that. So I had a kid who kind of messed around over the summer and took 2 classes at SMC, got a D and an F. And then after college, his mom felt like he should stay back and not go to a 4-year college just yet. And I was like, I think he needs to go to whatever college you got into, because you go to SMC, you now are averaging that into your GPA. So what you need to transfer to any better school is going to be real tough to get your grades up. So just know that if you're taking SMC classes or West LA classes, which I think is the one that Pali does more with, but any of those classes aren't as easy as people think. And if you get bad grades, those are on that transcript forever. And if you try to transfer later, it's going to be hard. So take it seriously. So yes, it could be good, but it's going to be a lot of work.
Okay, our next one is, do colleges invite their applicants to interview, or do they just do it to some of their applicants?
Okay, I feel like I'm gonna be a broken record. I apologize. It depends. So part of it, some schools do actual formal interviews with admissions. So you're meeting with people in admissions. Those are going to be more limited. So those generally are going to be like you kind of passed a certain threshold to get that invite. Others that are desperate for more applicants are like, we'll interview anybody who wants to. We want kids to want to come to our school, right? There are a lot of schools that do alumni interviews, and then it's contingent. It's all based on how many alumni signed up. So in LA, luckily, and by the way, a lot's on Zoom now, but some schools are going back to their coffee shop interviews, which means that whether everyone gets an interview simply depends on how many people signed up in the LA area and are willing to go to coffee shops to meet with teenagers. And from there, you might end up saying, oh, 90% of people were able to get an interview. By the way, I've had kids who lived in an area and they watched all of their classmates get interviews to Georgetown or Northwestern or wherever, and then they got in even though they never got an invite. So don't stress out if you don't get it. I think they just didn't get to their name on the list. They didn't have enough people to do the interviews. So if it's alumni, it's usually, well, actually both, it can be shortage, but if you have a ton of alumni, everyone will get an invite. There are also schools, Syracuse in particular is one. I think Tulane's doing it now, but there's a bunch of schools that do them like now as a senior. So I have a lot of my students are done in August or September with these interviews. They want people to interview ahead of time before they apply because it gets too bogged down and it gets too stressful later on. So they're like, we can't handle everybody in December, January. We want to do some up front. So those kids, if you're applying there, as long as you can do it before they're full, you can sign up. But at some point, the slots are all going to be gone. That's the other thing.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more.
Okay, let's do it.
It is getting flooded. We have so many questions.
Yes.
Okay. How does CSF play into the college application process?
So it's a great thing to put on your application. Do it. It depends on also where you're applying, because there are certain schools that they kind of expect to see it because everyone's of the caliber that they got the invite to join CSF. But if you don't stress about it. I would say it's not quite national merit finalist or semifinalist stuff, but it's a feather in your cap. It shows them that you had to have achieved a certain GPA. You have to have been active in your community to a certain level. So it's a good thing to add. It's a nice thing, but if you didn't get it, don't stress. If you did get it, it's not going to make you a shoo-in anywhere. It just rounds you out and is one more good thing to mention.
Okay, great. And actually, I would like to address one more because it's been asked multiple times. So I want to make sure we go over it. Everyone is asking, how do they sign up for the ACT and SAT?
Okay, excellent questions too. So if you're looking for the formal ones, College Board's website. So if you can Google College Board SAT registration, make sure you're going to the actual College Board website. ACT, it used to be actstudent.org. I think now it's just act.org. But same thing, you could do ACT registration and just make sure it's the official site. The first ones that pop up on Google will be, but you can register there. You have to register there. You can't do it any other way. Do it ahead of time, because not only do you have deadlines that are usually 6 weeks out, but for registration, but they can fill up sooner if they only have a certain number of rooms at a certain location available. If everyone 10 weeks out picks that site, it's closed. So I've had kids who've had to drive to Orange County to test because even though they beat the deadline, anything closer to them was full. So get on that. If you need accommodations, you have to apply for them through those websites also. So you can get on that if that's something relevant. And yes, I think hopefully that answers the question, but on their websites. And by the way, they are a little bit tedious. You can pour yourself a glass of wine. If not, pour yourself something that you like, and it's going to take a while. Settle in, and you're gonna have to fill out a lot of random information and just get through it. But it's tedious, but once you've done it once, the next time's not so bad. Anything else we have time for, or is that about it?
I think we got most of the heavy hitters. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, you guys. So we've got a ton more webinars coming your way for the next couple months. So I think, if you registered for this, you saw the other options. We've got a lot of great presenters coming in different topics, but if you have questions that are specific to you or your family, again, you're welcome to sign up for one of these. I'd be delighted to chat with you and answer questions that were maybe too sensitive or personal to address here. But hopefully we'll see you at additional webinars down the line.